Okay, so this video is about the movie It Ends With Us. If you didn't see the movie, this video ain't going to make any sense to you. So before I begin, though, please go to the comments and answer, what about you? Did you like the movie? And as a survivor of a narcissistic relationship, you'd be curious to know, how did this movie land for you? The reason this video is coming out so late is because it takes me a long time to watch stuff, which isn't a bad thing, because then the spoiler alert issues aren't so bad, because by the time I've seen something, everyone's seen something. Now, obviously, with this, It Ends With Us, I felt like I had to watch it because the themes were so resonant with the whole world of what we talk about around narcissistic abuse. And finally, I was on a flight, and this movie was on the flight, and there you go, I had some time. I actually never read the book, and it is conceivable that maybe the book did a better job with some of the issues that I didn't love about this movie that actually make us think about narcissistic abuse in a very particular way. So listen. The story of this movie, again, there's some spoiler alert here, but the story of this movie, the idea that intergenerational abuse can end, I like that. I can get behind that. And interestingly, the film was almost like being in a narcissistic relationship, because there was some stuff the film, the story, the book, whatever, got really right. But there's also a lot I felt it didn't. I also get that it was meant to be a story of domestic abuse. And while I hold that all domestic abusers are to some degree narcissistic or antagonistic, not all narcissistic people by any stretch are physical abusers. So let's start with what this movie got right, at least what I thought it got right, okay? The two main characters in the movie are Ryle, okay, the neurosurgeon dude, and Lily, the florist woman. Both of these people, at least the actors portraying them, are painfully attractive people. Now, the first red flag happens before Lily even learns this guy's name. It might as well have been someone, forget red flag, it was like someone poured an entire can of red paint, right? She observes him behaving in a very dysregulated, almost violent way. She sees him, she's standing somewhere, and she sees him kicking and upending a lounge chair on a rooftop deck. He just happened to not know she was there when he came out there. Note to everyone, when you see someone behaving in a physically dysregulated way like that, and you haven't yet been introduced, quietly leave and do not introduce yourself. But for this character, Lily, she grew up with violence, so it's potential at some level this behavior was almost somewhat normalized for her. And in the storyline, this Lily character was going through she's going through grief, she's going through a big transition. That's a time when people are uniquely vulnerable to things like love bombing. Her abusive father had just died, and she has now moved to a new city to open a new business. This dysregulated doctor man says lots of smart, seductive, love-bomby things to her after she sees him kicking the chair. He shares a sad story about a kid that died at work. He actually did every love bomb thing you could do at the same time. He pulls for sympathy. He tells her that she's dreamy. He tells her he wants to see her. He himself just looks gorgeous. He acts like he's kind of obsessed with her. He has intrusive boundaries. He wants to kiss her. I mean, the list goes on. It was like someone took every love bomb thing and put it into a 5-minute scene in a movie. Now, obviously, despite the red flags and the very transparent love bombing, the relationship obviously happened, or there would have been no movie. So the lady, Lily, she opens the flower shop, and would you know it, just as she's setting up the shop before it even opens, a woman just stops in from off the street and offers to work there, and by coincidence happens to be the sister of the love bomber. He, the love bomber, the doctor, of course, sends lots of love bomby flowers from her store. At least she's making money on it. He has a fabulous apartment. He is a successful doctor. He is in impeccable physical shape. It's almost like a jokey prototype of a dysregulated, grandiose, narcissistic abuser with the charm and the charisma and the handsomeness, all of it. We see the whole seduction play out, and while initially Lily plays a little hard to get, which frankly a lot of survivors of these relationships will look back and say, no, I didn't just give in to their charms, which sadly, when you don't just give in to their charms, that kind of even draws narcissistic people in deeper, so you really can't win. She finally succumbs, and they move in together fast. Remember that as a rule, not always, but as a rule, these relationships can move really fast, and they have lots of sexy times and all of that. And the first episode of physical abuse happens when a meal that they're cooking while they're kind of canoodling in the kitchen, the meal burns, she gets in the way of the oven, and he pushes her so hard and angrily that she gets cut. I actually thought that was a very astute scene because his behavior was primed for her to rationalize his behavior. He needs to protect his hands. He's a doctor. He got burned. She was in the way. And while his response was deeply inappropriate, many people who were lost in a big love story, like this character was, would excuse it. So it really captured how the trauma-bonded experience slowly unfolds, even when really terrible behavior is happening, because the rationalizations feel somewhat plausible. Other scenes in this movie that illustrate how these relationships slowly encroach also include, for example, when she tries to have dinner with her mother alone, but you could see his brooding rage when he recognized that he's not invited. So she gives in and she invites him. In these relationships, you see that they slowly take us over, that there's no separate us. So that scene also does a good job at showing that. The actress who plays Lily also did a good job of playing the sort of kind of breathy, constantly trying to de-escalate and be loving and sweet and light and breezy to keep the tightly coiled tension of the doctor partner at bay. So they have yet another love bomby scene where they witness the abusive boyfriend's sister. So the sister who works with her in the flower shop, that sister and that sister's husband have a baby. And Lily and the doctor boyfriend go visit them in the hospital. The abusive boyfriend spontaneously proposes to Lily in the hospital, and they have an impromptu wedding a few weeks ago. Again, abusive relationships often move too quickly. And throughout this movie, there is no addressing of his sort of jealous, short fuse, impulsive thing happening. And probably because she couldn't address it, right? Then there's a whole triangulation sequence. Her beloved but traumatized high school boyfriend, turns out he runs a hit restaurant in Boston, and of course he's gorgeous too. And by this point, the incident in the kitchen where she got cut had already happened. And this restaurant-owning ex-boyfriend had a mother who was physically abused as well. The ex-boyfriend and Lily recognize each other in the restaurant. The ex-boyfriend notices that Lily is cut. He sees her near the bathroom, and he already tells her to leave. You've got to get out of this relationship. It wasn't bad advice he was giving her. But as the abusive boyfriend recognizes, the doctor boyfriend recognizes that there's a tie to the past in the restaurant guy, his jealousy becomes a primary driver of his abuse. Again, his ego is injured, and it's consistent with what we see in narcissistic relationships as well. It all culminates in a terrible scene of abuse, where the doctor, now husband, abuses Lily, and she leaves. And it's at this point where the movie loses me. In a way, what happens is the version of, quote unquote, everything we wish would line up for every survivor of an abusive relationship so they can leave. That's the setup. And the vast, I mean vast majority of survivors don't have this. And as I watched it, I thought, if I could map out exactly what I would want the sequence to look like for people who make the decision to leave, this movie is what it would be. But this is rarely how life goes. So the film is either giving a really unrealistic depiction of what leaving an abusive relationship looks like. So that the problem with that is someone who does think that she will leave easily will get a painful awakening, or it could actually discourage someone from leaving a really toxic relationship because they know that they don't have all the things she has. So let's take a look at all the things this woman had, and that's why she was able to leave. Now everything I'm saying is a spoiler. So after the scene of violence, Lily calls the handsome restaurant owner ex-boyfriend, who of course conveniently is single, and he drops what he's doing and comes to her aid. He takes her to a hospital where she meets with a trauma and domestic violence informed medical professional, something that doesn't always happen, in fact doesn't often happen. There at the hospital, Lily finds out she's pregnant. She does not go back to the apartment where she lives with her doctor husband. Her mother, who lives a few hours away, comes down and helps Lily set up a new apartment, helps her with building the crib and the other furniture. And Lily you can see the texts and the calls are coming in from the husband, and Lily doesn't take them. Lily tells her husband's beloved sister, the husband and sister were very close. She tells her, this is also Lily's business partner, all that happened. And the sister, who adores the brother, the sister gently tells her, because he's my brother, I hope you forgive him. But as your best friend, I am telling you that if you go back, I'll never speak to you again. Again, I wish something like this happened to every survivor. But what was much more likely to happen is that the enablers will pressure the person who endured the abuse to give a second chance, and they don't remain best friends with them. In the scene with the sister is also something that messes with our heads. The sister tells Lily about the traumatic story of how when the sister and the doctor husband, when they were all children, that their brother was killed because the brother and Ryle, the doctor husband, were playing with a gun, which accidentally went off and killed the brother. And that defining trauma, and it certainly would be a defining trauma, messed him up. The challenge is this. That is sad. That's beyond sad. It's tragic. And that kind of post-trauma could certainly foreshadow things like impulsivity, especially if it was never addressed in any therapy of any kind when he was a kid. However, that sad story does not obviate or forgive his abuse. But for many survivors, a story like that can become a rationalization for the behavior. So the film kind of gets at that too, though at times it also seems like the film itself kind of tries to over-explain away his behavior. Like, look at all these bad things. That's why he's doing all these terrible things. But I will still put that framing into the win column for them because it's true. Now, his texts and calls and begging for forgiveness, that part is also true and right. One day he comes over to her house. He must have set it up in advance. She calmly lets him in. She's still pregnant. And he calmly helps her finish assembling the crib. And then she calmly asks him to leave. That's not going to happen in most cases in real life, especially in a story like this, with a guy who's so dysregulated and whose introduction to her was him violently kicking furniture. Now he's as docile as a little lamb. And the implication is that this dude has not been getting any therapy. He calmly and forlornly leaves her apartment, and as he is at the door, she calls him back in to come feel the baby moving inside of her, and he gently does. The viewer even gets anxious at that point. She'll take him back. I know I did. In general, during the Hoover, the abusive person will go back to being really well regulated and apologetic and gentle. But they can only keep that up for so long. And if the hoovering apologies are not responded to, then generally we see it turn into rage. So then Lily goes to the hospital. She has the baby, and he's right there at her side when she delivers it. In fact, I wasn't clear from the film whether they were back together, because it sure as hell seemed like that. And it's all a beautiful baby delivery moment, and the baby is beautiful, and they cry together. And she even offers to name the baby after his dead brother. I felt trauma bonded to the guy at that point, and I kind of felt sad for him. And you think they're back together. And at that point in the hospital, wants him to name the baby after the dead brother. She's delivered the baby like 10 minutes ago. She asks for a divorce. And then she gives him a whole speech about, what would you tell your daughter to do if a man beat her? And he, of course, says, because it's a movie, he says, I would tell her to leave. Now, sadly, for the vast majority of survivors, asking for a divorce at any moment, but especially at that one, when the abuser must feel confident that it's all going to work out the way they want, he wanted her back, that in real life would have resulted in terrible rage. And somebody asking rhetorically what the abuser would tell their daughter if their daughter were to experience the kind of abuse that this person inflicted on her, most abusers would say, would you please stop making such a big deal out of it? It's in the past, for God's sake. Can't we move forward? Can't you see I'm trying and I'm here? And gaslight, gaslight, gaslight. He, of course, calmly agrees to the divorce and leaves the room. That's not how it's going to happen. And adding even more implausibility to this, there's no evidence of this guy engaging in post-separation abuse. Even when she first left, he kept intensely texting her, But they didn't seem like angry texts or angry calls. He wasn't showing up to her house at the middle of the night. There was no smear campaign. There was no turning his sister against her. Nothing. Again, that's not likely. So then she obviously, they must get divorced, and then she starts raising baby. And as you can imagine, when the baby is almost a year old or 1.5 years old, she conveniently runs into the haughty ex-boyfriend restaurant guy, and they have a reunion at the farmer's market, and it's implied but not said that they will have their happily ever after. Again, in real life, given the violent jealousy the abusive doctor husband had, there would have been all kinds of abuse leveled at the restaurant man, and perhaps even more violence. The doctor had already once punched the restaurant guy before. So ultimately, let's break down what Lily had that let her leave. She had the appropriate boundaries and the unconditional support of her abusive ex-boyfriend who still loved her. She had the loving support of her abusive partner's sister. She had a successful award-winning business. She had a supportive mother. And now Lily's abusive father was dead, so she didn't have to deal with him, so the mother was free and clear to help her. And she had an abusive partner who magically did not engage in post-separation abuse, nor does it appear that he tried to fight her in family court for custody of their child, who she seemed to have full custody of, and she had the time and support she needed to very likely end up with yet another financially successful, but this time loving and not abusive partner. If I could put this toolkit and storyline together for every survivor who's struggling with whether to leave a narcissistic or other form of abusive relationship, to give them support, love, resources, no post-separation abuse, no family court abuse, no custody battle, and a new love story all teed up in the wings to take up with after about 1.5 years or so, I could shut my practice down and retire. Because this isn't how this works. The message of this book and film, that people can leave and end intergenerational cycles, it's not a bad one. And the idea that we often walk right into these abusive relationships, even when we know they're bad, because we witnessed similar patterns like this earlier in life, that was also on point. But the neat and tidy 2-hour bow on top means that people who are going through any kind of abusive relationship may look at a film like this with hopeful eyes and think, well, I don't have those things. I'm actually quite scared what would happen if I tried to leave. And those fears would be well-founded, but then wonder, well, she left. Why can't I? I know, you're all thinking it. It's a movie. I get it. And I have to be happy for the needle moving a little. In this film, they did get a little at the subtlety of the trauma bond and how naturally these justifications flow and why we keep abuse secret and how we try to unsee it. And I recognize that books and films like this are meant to be an escape. But I do get a little concerned when things look so unrealistic and easy and pat and dried. The film definitely highlighted for me that leaving an abusive relationship of any kind, and it's what I've always known to be true, that leaving an abusive relationship of any kind requires support, and most people don't have it, not like this Lily person did. And we have to be careful to not shame survivors who can't just get up and leave and wind up in a cute little apartment with help and a handsome dude waiting in the wings and few fears for her safety. That's not how this works. That's not how this works, but heaven knows, I wish it did. Them's my thoughts. Would love to hear yours. Thanks again.